This is Wednesday, March 20, 2019. I'm Cindy Kelly, and I'm in Pasadena, California, and I'm with Inge-Juliana Sackmann Christy. So what I want you to do is say your full name and then spell it.
Inge-Juliana Sackmann Christy. And should I spell it?
Yes,
I-N-G-E, Juliana, J-U-L-I-A-N-A, Sackmann, S like Sam, A-C-K-M-A-N-N, Christy, C-H-R-I-S-T-Y.
But I want to start with you and want you to tell us about where you were born and when, and how you became interested in science, what about your family's background, and how you immigrated to Canada.
Well, that's a long story. My family background, we are Germans, and my ancestors were fed up with the wars in Europe. So they had a fair amount of property, and they sold all their property in Germany, mostly they were in Prussia, they could either go to the United States, or they could west, or they could go east. They made the mistake of going east. They were offered something by the Russian Tsar that they could go to a territory that had just been taken by war from the Turks, by the Black Sea, and they would be able to live their life there without any service to the Russian military. They could keep their own religions and their own language and their own school systems, and they wouldn't pay taxes for a certain period, and they could basically live there like a German colony. And Napoleon had just gone through much of Europe, and he'd invaded much of Europe and Russia and so on. And most of my ancestors came from Prussia, and they were fed up having to serve another conqueror and sacrifice their sons. So they decided not to go to the West, which I very much regret. They could have gone to the United States. They instead went into Russia because they could keep their animals. They were horse lovers, they were animal lovers, and they could take their animals with them. They had carriages, and you could load them up. They could take all their belongings, which you couldn't take on a little trunk on a boat, which I did later. So they immigrated with their animals into this Russian area, and by the Black Sea, and when they came there, it was a shock. It was very different from Europe that they were accustomed to, from Germany with the gorgeous forests and lakes and everything so attractive. There were no trees. It was just grassland and nothing to build a house with, no rocks. And they had to, 2/3 of them died. They had, with their shovels, there was no machinery then, dug themselves into the ground and live underground to survive the first bitter winters. There was no decent water around. They had to drill their own, not drill, they had to make their wells. And so it was a very tough beginning. And only very few survived. And I'm the child of some of these survivors. And the women were extremely important in that period. So that's why we have strong women in my family. And I love horses. And it comes from that period still. My children are top-notch riders. It's in the blood. It just goes for generations. And they became very well-to-do. And they sent their children back to the homeland to go to school. Oh, and they had to serve the military and the Russian. After a few generations, papers were all torn up, and they had to go into the military again. Some of them were fed up that Russia broke their promises, and some of them went into the United States at that time. And unfortunately, my family still stayed. They were still attached to everything they had, and they didn't want to leave everything. So they stayed in their well-to-do houses with chandeliers from Switzerland and who knows what, and lived a very nice life there. They imported cars. The cars were driven by the women. The men had chauffeurs. So that's the kind of environment that I come from. And then came, the First World War was pretty lousy. Then came the Second World War. And they had the choice, because they were well to do, of being, Hitler and Stalin made a pact. And either you went to Siberia and you got executed, especially when you had money, which we had, or you went, followed Hitler's invitation and go back to the mother country. They had no choice. So they didn't want to go to Siberia. So they left and went back to the mother country, where they were really not wanted. They had lived outside for over 100 years. They spoke German with a slightly different, older tone and so on. They were not really welcome in the homeland. But they established themselves again in Prussia, and they were still against warfare. It hadn't passed away, but my father was drafted. He was the right age in his 20s, and so he served in Italy fighting the Americans against his will. And so they were involved in war again, and it was very bad. And the Second World War, I have many memories of it. I lived through the bombardment from the American airplanes. I saw that, I heard it. I grew up in the ruins of Western Germany. We fled from the communist East. We fled several times. First of all, we fled from Russia into Prussia. Then we left from Prussia into East Germany, near Berlin, near where that big bombardment was. I was right there. Dresden was very much bombarded. I was in the outskirts as a refugee, as a 3-year-old. So I heard all that coming down. And then we fled for years with our property, smuggled. I became a good smuggler as a child, from East Germany to West Germany. Whole train loads of machinery was smuggled by my father, successfully. And so then I grew up in West Germany. And among all the ruins caused mostly by the American airplanes. And so, it's a difficult past. And I have pictures in this book that I dug up where you can see the things that I saw. And then the times were so difficult that my parents split up. They had an ugly divorce because of the stress of the war. They were both stressed out. My father was at the Italian front being shot through by the Americans, right to the lungs, right to the arm, while my mother was at home with an officer and 18 soldiers guarding our estate. Our estate was a big deal. We had our own private lake and who knows what else. My grandfather had dozens of secretaries. We were very wealthy. And so a lot of conflicts arose when my father was far away in the front, trying to survive. And he owes his life to kind Americans, he says, who could have shot him many times and they chose not to. And I don't know how many he shot of them, but anyway, he didn't want to shoot either, but it was one of those forced things you have to go when you're the right age. And so they had a lot of conflicts in their personal life because he was more or less ruined. My father was ruined emotionally after the war. And so they had this ugly divorce which went on for 3 years before it was finally signed, and then they had another fight for 5 years who would get the children. I was awarded to him. I was the oldest and I had most energy. He wanted me. And then my second sister was awarded to him too, and my little one was awarded to my mother by court. And it was a very ugly divorce. And my mother got 0 alimony and next to no child support. That's what German courts would do. So my mother said, to heck with Germany. She didn't want to live in that country either. So she applied for the United States, but she had no profession. She was a dilettante. She could play piano, she could arrange flowers, but she was not a professional. And she had no husband. She was a divorced woman with 3 young kids. So the United States said, absolutely not. We don't take people like that. So she applied to Canada, and she was in the bottom of a pile. And she tried to learn English, and she worked for the PX. She wouldn't even get a job. She was too old in her 20s, and she didn't have an education for jobs. Germany wouldn't give her a job. So she worked for the Americans, for the army, as a sales clerk in the army stores. And she learned more English there, and she liked the Americans and the Canadians. And one day a Canadian family came in, and they had a child that had a schizophrenic attack right there in the store. And my mother bent down and took this child in her lap. She was a good mother. And she got this child to calm down and not suffer so much. And the father was very impressed by my mother, and the wife too, and said, you know, is there anything I can do for you in your life? She said, yes, I want to leave Germany. I want to get out of this country. My children are taken away, and the courts are so impossible. He took all the money, and she got nothing. It was my mother's money mostly. 90% was his, 10% was his, 90% was hers, but he got it all by German. He bribed the court, he bribed the lawyers. It was an awful story. Anyway, she said, I don't want to live in this country where women can be treated this way. I want to leave to Australia or New Zealand, US, anybody will take me, but out of this country. And the man said, you know, I'm the consul of the Canadian country, and come to my office. If that's what you want more than anything else, come to my office. And so she came to his office, and he said, well, I found your applications below in this bottom pile, and here, I'll sign it. You can go to Canada. And she hugged the man. She had a way of getting out of this country. And she left with the next boat. And she left her 3 children behind with her parents, knowing she might never see us again, because I was, my father had custody of me and my middle sister, and she only had the little one. I was 13, 12, and 11. Yeah, every year there was one more child. Anyway, my father always had a fondness of me because he saw my energy, and he wanted me at his right hand in his business. He had business in Brazil. He had business all over Germany. He liked horses. He was a fantastic horseback rider. I liked horses. So he had a certain connection with me, even though he had another wife, another child, and children and so on. So he would give me favors. And I asked him for a favor to go and see my mother in Canada, because I was very close. I wanted to see her. And I knew once he would give me that piece of paper that I could leave the boundary of this country, I would never come back. And he gave me that piece of paper, and $60 because he wanted me to come back. So I traveled on the boat for 11 days with $60 in my pocket, just a little bit of English that I learned in school, but I didn't understand English. I could just read and write. And I left by myself with someone supposed to take care of me as an immigrant, but they didn't speak English, and I was pretty independent. So I left at age 13 to go to Canada. And a few months after my mother, and I arrived in Montreal, and I got myself, my mother didn't have money to pick me up. She was 5 hours away in Toronto. I had $60, so I got myself a cab, and I had a big trunk, and I asked my mother, what do you want me to bring? She says, books, china, silver, oriental rugs. So I bought a trunk with much of that stuff, and I got it into a cab, and I got it with some porter into the train, and I went from Montreal by train to Toronto, where she stood at the station. And then I was there. And I was very lucky. She lived in an area of immigrants, but these were intelligent immigrants. She had one room. We shared a kitchen and a bathroom with other immigrants. And very nice family from Estonia. This is close to where my family had come from, and we got along very well. And my mother made $30 a week, working at C.S. Roebuck, selling things. But you couldn't live very well for $30 a week. You had to pay rent too. So I got myself a job. I lied about my age. You couldn't work below the age of 16, so I said I was 16. I put on high heels, I put on makeup, nail polish, and dressed myself like a big teenager, you know. And I got myself a job after school, and I was very lucky. I ended up in a very good school, and I told I want to get out of school as fast as I could to get my little sisters over. I had another sister, 12, another 11, and so we needed money to be able to eat. So I told the principal in the school that I'd had 3 years of high school. This was, I was 13 years old. Well, he didn't understand the system in Germany. I had 3.5 years of what's called public school, and then you go into, continue to grade 8 in public school, which is the school for ordinary people, or you're one of the elite few percent, and you go to the gymnasium. And you have to pass special exams, and anyway, I barely passed those. I wasn't a very good student with the divorce of my parents in the background. I was a very bad student. But I got in through some luck, and I had 3.5 years of high school. So when I came to Canada, and he wanted all the immigrants were put back, after all the immigrants. And so I told him that I had 3.5 years of high school. And so he thought he was putting me back in grade 10. I want to get out of school as fast as I could and get a job and help my mother. That was my aim in life. And he thought grade 10 was putting me back. Well, I was jumping 3 grades. I'd only had 7 years of grade school, 3.5 public, and then that gymnasium, 3.5 makes 7. So I was jumping 3 grades. And I had to get into Latin. That was a very good school. They were teaching Latin and French and German and not Hebrew, but all, a lot of languages. And they were very advanced in physics and all the sciences. And anyway, I worked my butt off to not get put back into grade 9. And I did very well because I wanted to get out of school. Remember, that was my aim in life, to get out of school. And I became a top student because I wanted to get out of school. And I won every prize they had. And my picture still hangs in that school. And so I used to stay in school till 8 o'clock to study, because you only had 1 room anyway, and there was no food anyway. And the teachers were so kind in that Canadian country. They allowed me to stay myself in the school with the custodians, and they left the light on for me so that I could study. And I studied, and at 8 o'clock I went home. And then I got myself a job, Thursday night after school, Friday night after school, Saturday 7 cents an hour. And Sunday I studied again. So I helped my mother, 7 cents an hour. And in a few months, we had enough money that we could rent something bigger, rent another room and get my second sister over. And she did exactly the same thing that I did. I was always kind of a threat to her, so she had to do what I did and better. So she came in half a year, and she went and worked as a babysitter, and so she worked. And then half a year after that, we got the little one. My father, of course, thought that I would come back to Germany, but after we got all the 3 children, and he sent 0 money to Canada, I stopped all correspondence. I was angry at him, very angry, because he had a house near a river with his own inside swimming pool. He had a place at the Italian Riviera to do his vacations at. He had a place in the Alps to do his skiing at, and we were so poor. And he had that on my mother's money. He had 10%, and she had written over 90% in order to keep the marriage apart, together. And he'd taken it all, and then he kicked her out. Anyway, so I was very angry at him. And I broke all contact with him for 5 years. And after 2 years, we bought a house. My mother bought a house with the savings of myself and my second sister. The little one we didn't allow to work. She was always so thin-looking and sickly-looking, and we said, "You stay home, we'll do the job." And my grandparents sent over some money, and between the 3 parties we were able to buy a house. My mother wouldn't get any old house. It had to be a brand new house that she picked and so on, and we rented rooms. And I continued working, as I had always done. And I continued to get better in school all the time. And finally, it was time to go to university. I wanted to stay in Toronto to help my mother. And I was admitted to the University of Toronto with every prize they had. So I had free tuition and lots of money. I always liked money, frankly, because we had so little. And so I continued in there. And then, as I say, we bought our house. And when I was 18, there were other immigrants living in our house. They became too interested in my little sisters and in me and my mother. So I wanted to kick them all out. And I don't want to have tenants in the house anymore. And so I started up contact with my father after 5 years of no contact. And I said I wanted to go back to Germany and meet with him again. And he sent me an airplane ticket, and I went with a propeller plane from Toronto back to Stuttgart, and I didn't know if I'd end up in jail because I had broken a contract, and he was angry, or whether he would be nice for a change. Well, he picked me up at the airport, and he was so nice. And he did not put me in jail or anywhere else for breaking his contract. And he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, we need everything. First of all, I need monthly money. We can kick all these tenants out. Secondly, we need lots of clothing. We have no winter coats in Bitter Toronto. and she said, come to my department stores. He owned something like Bullock's. And while he was sitting in with his executives, I went shopping, and he says, just give somebody the tickets and I'll have it sent over to Canada. So I shopped, you can't believe how much in 1 hour or two, for all 4 of us. I even shopped furniture. And he sent it all, and he sent us the monthly amount, exactly what I asked for years. So he behaved. And then I took up contact with him again, and I continued visiting him. We continued to have a decent relationship, and he finally visited us in Canada. Anyway, I took up contact, and we had good contact to the end of his life. He married a friend of my mother. He had 3 more little girls with his second wife, and he actually had a lot of property in Brazil because he loved the country, and he had rubber plantations and everything imaginable, gold mines and so on. He started a city there where each of his children got one street named after them. So I have one street there after my name. And when he did all this Brazilian stuff, he actually came to North America and he visited us in our house. And he was so impressed. And he was sorry that he had divorced my mother. So I began to forgive him a little bit. And he became to be a decent father. And every time I went to Europe, I visited him. I was invited to astronomical meetings in Hamburg and in Greece and so on. And every time I went over there, I made a point of visiting him, and he always gave me a car to travel around. And then he said, you know, I want to do something for you. And I want to give you an early inheritance. But I'm going to give it to you in an age 25 in 4 installments. And if you buy yourself fur coats like my second wife does, or if you drive a Mercedes sports car like my second children do, you'll get 0. You have to show me that you can do something with the money I give you and not just spend it for a good life. I want to have reports how much money you make on the money I give you. Now the exchange rate was lousy. It was like today, the Deutschmark and the European dollar are almost equal. At that time it was 4.25 for 1, so we got a lousy exchange rate for the Deutschmark at that time. So I didn't get very much. I got basically $6,700, which is peanuts for my first installment, and then it went up to 7,000, and then the 4th installment was 10. So it went up as a currency exchange rate. And I had to show him what I could do with the money. You know, and if I wouldn't invest it well, then my sisters wouldn't get there. So I owed it to my sisters, so we all got it to the bitter end. And with that money, I worked very hard to make money. So I was okay financially. I wasn't poor after a certain time anymore, due to this European stuff that I had to invest. I bought houses. I owned 4 houses at the end, and I had money to buy a 5th. When I buried my husband, I owned 4 houses. And I had money sitting in the bank to buy a 5th one. And I bought single-family houses in Vancouver where I wanted to live. That was my dream city. Sort of 2-3 bedroom houses in medium area, not slums, not high class, something that people could afford. And my mother lived in Vancouver at the time, and she would look after my houses while I was off having fun in Europe. Because I had such a bitter feeling with Germany. And many of the Jewish people do too, and they are right. I mean, they have much more reason than I had, but even as German, I was pretty bitter. So I wanted to get over my bitterness. And when I won a NATO award at the University of Toronto, and I could go to any NATO country. It was a pretty, no taxes paid on that award, a fair amount of money. And I thought of going to Princeton, where some of the astrophysics was going on. I wanted to work with Martin Schwarzschild and other people at Princeton. I never wanted to come to California, no way to Caltech and this smog city, LA. That's the last place in the country I would go to. And Germany was another one. The Cambridge of Germany was always Göttingen. That's where Heisenberg was, that's where many of the great people that I read about the great mathematician and physicists were in Göttingen. So I very much wanted to use this opportunity and see what the place is like. So I used my money to go to Göttingen, my award. And the award was for 2 years. And while I was at Göttingen, I was very disappointed. this is not the place that it had been in the past. Everybody that's great is gone. They live in their shadow. And the man I went for was Kippenhahn. Turned out he was a close colleague of my husband working on variable stars. We moved in a very close society. I knew all the people he knew and vice versa. We moved in the same area, but there was no romantic interest in those days between my husband. This was 69 in December, just before Christmas. I went to join Kippenhahn at Göttingen, and he saw that I was very disappointed. And we had a very good relationship, Kippenhahn and I, always. And he said, you know, Fräulein Sackmann, why don't you go to Munich? That's where Heisenberg is today. That's where all the action is. Why don't you give a talk down there and see if they're interested in you coming? So I went down and I gave a talk, and I met Saltpeter, an American here, and I met many interesting people there from Scotland, from England, and so on. And I said, yeah, that's the place I want to go to Munich, to Heisenberg's Institute. And I was there for almost 3 years. My fellowship ran out, my Canadian NATO fellowship, but I got a German one, the von Humboldt's award, and I got the senior one, was again pretty high award. I mean, I was higher paid than Kippenhahn was, you know, with the exchange rate the first time. The second time was also pretty good. Since I had been so poor, I was always interested, you know, having enough to live on, because there were many years when my hair fell out, when I was starving in Toronto. When I was 18, I had a bald head. My hair was falling out, undernourished. So when I went to Germany, I went with a scarf. And I told my father, can you take me to any institute in Germany where they can do something? Yes, he took me. There was some institute from Rome, and he paid a lot of money, and my hair came back, but it took years. But, you know, we were poor. We could buy meat once a week at the most, and that went to the little one who needed it the most, and so on. And the rest of us, you know, we got an apple. So, so I knew what poverty was like. So I've gone from being very rich, I had my own nanny, to being extremely poor. My hair was falling out. So I knew both sides of the coin. And, well, anyway, I have hair again, as you can see. But anyway, I was at Heisenberg, and there I got promptly engaged to the son of the co-director, Biermann. He was a young man my own age, and he spoke 10 languages like they do in Europe. You know, I barely had a little French, and I knew English, and I knew German, and a little Latin. But he spoke Hebrew, he spoke everything around. That's what the Europeans do. And he was an astrophysicist and very intellectual, and I liked him, and he liked me. And also for him, I was a person coming from North America. He was ready to leave Germany too. He was fed up like Germany, just like we had been. So I took him to Canada on a trip, and he met my mother and everything. I took him to my university, and we looked for a job offer in the US. This is important, that's why I mention it. Santa Cruz, where my husband was later possible administration. So we went to Santa Cruz, and he was behind me. He's the same age, but he hadn't jumped grades like I had. So he was maybe 2 years in education behind me, and he got the job. Okay? I did not. Here I had won tons of prizes, but he was a male and I was a female. And they had limited money. They could only give postdoc to one of the couple, so it was always be the male. It was the same thing at Caltech. If there was something, it would go to the male, and the woman just had to find her own way somehow. So that made me think, well, marrying someone of my own age has handicaps in the same field. And then his father didn't drive a car. They had chauffeurs. And then when he described the poor life that my mother had led in Canada, his parents said, hands off, don't get involved with this girl. So I was turned down by his father, who was a co-director of Heisenberg. And well, that was pretty bitter. I was very proud of what we had done, but this didn't count. And then we ended up in a train looking at the countryside of England, And I happened to be in the department with the Portuguese, and I had already bought a ticket to go back to Greece, where I'd been before, to a NATO conference. These international conferences, where they come from 50 countries, they always have satellite conferences in specific fields afterwards, normally 2 weeks. And I'd already paid airplane ticket, hotel, registration fee to go to a NATO conference in Greece, where I'd been before, and I loved Greece. And so I ended up in the department where all the Portuguese delegation was sitting, and we started talking. And then the next day they came to me and they said, Miss Sackmann, we want you to come to our NATO conference in Portugal. And I said, well, I'm already signed up for the one in Greece. And they said, we want you to come. So they came the next day, they said, you know what, you don't have to pay registration fee, and you don't have to pay for the hotel room if you share it with another young lady from somewhere. So you don't have those expenses. I said, okay, interesting, because somebody who came to Munich, who took me to the ballet there and to all kinds of nice things, a professor from England, he wanted to have a romance with me while I was in Munich. And when I was in England, he was British, he wanted me to see his country estate. So he ended up, he got himself a bus with 60 seats, and he wanted me to come to his country estate, and together with the other 59 astronomers from all over. And when I come to his country estate, it was indeed very beautiful, very British beautiful. There was Christie. He was one of the 60. And we started talking the whole night in the kitchen, where he came from, where he had studied. He told me about Oppenheimer and Berkeley, and he was born in Vancouver. I hooked right on. Born in Vancouver, my dream city, Canada. Ooh, even more attractive. And we had a wonderful conversation, and he asked me all about what I'd done for my PhD thesis, and asked him what he'd done his PhD, and went on and on and on the whole night. That night, I knew I would marry this man. After the evening in the kitchen, the bus took us back to our town where the conference was, and I couldn't sleep. And I went down to the ocean where the waves were breaking in the middle of the night, and I looked at these ocean waves breaking over these big rocks. And I said, Christy is going to be like one of these ocean waves breaking over the rocks. This man is going to break into my life. I studied his hand. There was no ring there. I knew nothing about it. He never mentioned anything about his private life. So I knew this man, he's it, as far as I'm concerned. So I looked at him. The next day, he was tall, so I was sticking out, so I found him among all these, there were 2,000 people at that meeting. I found him in one of the breaks among the 2,000 people, and I said, Professor Christy, the Portuguese, and he told me he's going to Portugal. The Portuguese delegation, I was in their department, and they were very much wanting me to come to their place and to contribute us to physics. He didn't blink an eye. I didn't interest him at all. So I said, okay, the man is happily married. I don't break up marriages. That's not something I do. Let him go. And so I went back to the Portuguese and I said, I'm not coming. And I used the airplane ticket as an excuse. I'd already bought the airplane ticket costing so and so much. And so they looked me up the next day and said, our committee has said we're going to pay for your airplane ticket. We insist you come to Portugal. And I said, well, I don't want to go. I'm more interested in this thing in Greece anyway. So I go to my boss. I said, boss, I want to go to Greece. These Portuguese want me to go to Portugal. You are going to Portugal. You tell me what I should do. He said, Miss Sackmann, I want you to go to Portugal where I go. And there's all my students there, and my wife is there. You like to sit with her anyway. You come to Portugal. I said, okay, boss, your will is my command. If you say I go to Portugal, I will go. So I came late. I had to go to Munich, wash my clothing, change to other kinds of clothing in Britain, and I came late and I said, Christy is passé. He's happily married, and I don't get involved with people like that just because he doesn't wear a ring. And I'm going to ignore him. I'm going to have fun with my German colleagues there, with my Italian colleagues there, with my British colleagues there, with my Scottish friends. Christy can do what he wants to do. I'm not going to talk to him once in any of the breaks. And I sit by the pool one day having fun with my German colleagues with a big white hat. He has the guts to come from the back, where I didn't see him, lift my hat in public, a big white hat, and he said, who's hiding under this hat? I said, boy, this man has guts. he lifts my hat, he touches my clothing with all my colleagues here, and he asks me such questions. Miss Sackmann, would you accompany me on a walk down to the ocean? And I said, oh, nothing can happen if I walk along the ocean. So we walked and walked and walked, and not a single word was exchanged. I didn't want anything to do with him anyway. And he didn't say anything either. I said, fine, walk doesn't hurt anybody. And then after the end of the walk, he says, I have 2 sons, age 26 and 24. And that's all he said. I said, oh, interesting news, he has 2 sons. I was 28, almost my age. And then next day he comes to me in some break, will you walk with me at the ocean again? Okay, I can walk. I didn't say a word, I wasn't interested. And he says, I'm in the middle of a divorce. I said, okay, now it becomes interesting. My wife has moved out already. He said, well, he's trying to tell me something. And then he said, are you willing to go into the ocean with me? I said, well, I've never been in an ocean with big waves. I don't know how to swim. He says, I'll show you how to handle big waves. And he went in, he was like a statesman. I thought, gosh, this is not a scientist, this is an athlete. And, and he showed me how to handle these big waves. And that's how it continued. And then he wrote many letters. I have letters here where he never published papers. He's famous in physics for not publishing papers. He sent around preprints, and other people walked away with his ideas. And they got all kinds of recognition for what they published, and he was the one who gave him the idea. That was his style. He did research for its own sake, not for getting recognition. He loved research. It was his big love. The other big love was Caltech. And he did it because he liked it. And so I put out things where he said, you know, I don't write, people complain him not answering letters, not writing letters, not writing papers. Jerry Brown, who was a colleague of Hans Bethe, who wrote a book on Hans Bethe, told me, Juliana, he opened up whole fields in physics and never published. And so we had a big romance going on in Portugal for the almost 2 weeks we were there, and he left by plane to go back to the west, and I left by plane to go back to the east, and then there was a letter exchange. 3, 4, 5 letters a week. He wrote to me, I have never written so many letters to anyone. You know, 3 letters a week is starting off with, and then he wanted to come to Europe, and he actually came. Well, after changing Caltech so that women could come here, yeah, he did that first, and then he actually came, and he wanted to see how I could ski. Well, I wasn't much of a skier, he was a much better skier. And we went skiing in Switzerland and in Austria together. 2 rooms, because I didn't trust that whole situation. 2 rooms, 2 people, I told him before he came. But he wanted to get to know me more because he'd had such a bad experience the first time, so he studied me from top to bottom. And it was an incredible romance, and I concluded the same thing like in Britain, that I could spend a life with this man, even though he was 26 years older. And I figured I'd only have 10 years with him because of the age difference, you know. And then all of a sudden, the romance was off. He decided after a super duper time, oh yes, and I said, I'm going to look over this Caltech place, and I'm going to see if I can get a job in Stanford, in Seattle, Boulder, Colorado, I had in Vancouver, somewhere on the West Coast. I really preferred the East Coast, but you know, I was making a sacrifice coming to the West Coast for him. And I came here and I introduced myself. I kept the romance very, how should I say, private. Nobody knew, except the colleagues in Portugal who saw us together all the time that we had, but nobody saw our letters. Nobody saw that he flew over for 2 weeks. I kept it very private. I didn't want to be attached to such a famous man. I wanted to make my name in science on my own and not as connected to him. And but the father of my second fiancé, he knew. He asked me in the lobby, what's going on between you and Christy? I said, won't discuss it. And that's none of his business. But anyway, it was a pretty strong romance. And I came to Caltech to introduce myself, to see if I could get a chance against all odds as a postdoc here. I was hired on the spot. Fowler said in his office, he had plenty of research money, I want you here, you can come anytime you wanted. They weren't. But I just won an award in Germany. So I couldn't just leave there either. I had to stay there for 9 months or 12 months because I was very pleased to get that award. And so I couldn't come immediately. I could come at the end of the year. And by that time the romance was kaput. Christy decided, the age difference is just too much. And all the other things that age differences brought, he knew that I would want children in my life. He already had children, didn't go very well. He wanted no more children. And other things, he always figured I would flirt with others and I was just too young, that men would be after me in science, and you know, there are not that many women, so he figured I'm unsafe. And so he says no, he's going to find somebody who's more is in his own age bracket, someone who doesn't need children anymore. He recognized that I needed children in my life. Someone who doesn't come with all this burden. And so I decided not to come. But I had this thing, this fellowship. So I went to my boss. He was in Göttingen, I was in Munich. That's 8 hours by train. So I got myself a plane ride, 8 hours up and 8 hours back, and staying a night over there to ask my boss, what should I do? I don't want to go to Caltech anymore. I have no interest. I want to get this position in Hamburg. Same thing like Portugal. He says, Fräulein Sackmann, it is my command that you go to Caltech and you tell us here in Germany what they're doing. We can learn, we need more exchanges. I want you to go back, go for 2 years, and I'll make sure you get that position in Hamburg, you come back. I said, like before, boss, your will is my command. And I left. And I stayed in the Athenaeum, and I was not going to have any contact with this man who was so challenging, so difficult. And, you know, I wasn't interested in marriage under all these circumstances. It's too difficult for me too. Well, it finally happened. It did finally happen, you know. And his colleagues at Caltech, his buddies persuaded him that he's lucky if he gets me. So we finally married, and I was going to go and have a wedding in Germany, just 2 people and a witness. And then Caltech, the president, Harold Brown, he says he wants to invite all of Caltech once it became known that the provost was going to marry an astrophysicist. 26, you know, he wanted a big Caltech. He invited all the professors and all the wives, and invite all the children too. So it was a big event with a lot of dancing, candlelit in his garden. And just before that wedding, I wanted to jump out. I got cold feet again. Either he got cold feet or I got cold feet. One of us always had cold feet. But because his secretary had already written all of these invitations and they had already gone to such big expense, I thought, I'm not going to embarrass them. So I went through with it, against my fears. And it turned out to be, on that night of the wedding, Caltech professors came to our house with pots and pans and all kinds of things to make music on our wedding night. It's in my book. It's one of the books I haven't published yet. So it was quite something, and it's the best thing I ever did. But it was meant to happen. Bosses and people all over, his boss, my boss, they made this happen. And then I got to know his world, you know, which was very different from my world. And I noticed that we're all in the same group of people. Biermann, the father who turned me down, the father of my second fiancé, he had been to dinner in Christie's home. He used to come to the United States regularly each summer. He came to Caltech, of course. He was hosted by Professor Christy and his first wife, and he couldn't believe that Christy would marry somebody like me. And he actually came to this house while seeing Professor Christy, but I was the new wife now, and already had a little baby. And anyway, life is very strange. But we had the same circle everywhere we went. When I went through the letters for you to prepare myself, we knew all the same people. There were the exchanges. It was just meant to be. It was fate. And I would marry him again in the next life. It was a very good, dangerous thing to do.
Tell us about what you know of his experience and background, and how he, you know, life in Los Alamos, or whatever you think is the best way to present the rest of this
Well,
story.
he unlike myself, had no parents. His father was a Jewish engineer who couldn't get jobs in Vancouver, where he married a beautiful woman who was a fellow student. They were both at McGill, and they fell very much in love. And his English grandmother, the mother of this particular father, came on the Titanic to to meet this young woman, and she was totally against her. And there was a marriage contract made that none of the British money would ever end up with these Canadian children, if there would be any. And she would get a certain amount at the beginning from her husband, so she could have a proper household, or the proper silver and the proper who knows what. And then she could, and he would give her a certain amount, $10,000, which is a lot of money at that time, later. But the children, if there are any, would get zero from England. And as I say, she inherited a tremendous amount of money. She could buy a boat ticket together with the richest people on that Titanic boat which went down. Every boat she went on went down. This was 1912. This boat went down April 15th, 1912. 1907, she came to Canada also to meet her beloved son. That boat went down too, but she wasn't on it. That went down a couple of years later, just before this Second World War, which started in 1914, First World War. Anyway, she was very much against this young woman. They married nevertheless, and he looked very Jewish, the facial bones and everything, and he lived in British Columbia, very British, and he couldn't find work as an engineer. So he joined the Canadian Air Force to become a little bit more Canadian, serving in the military in the First World War. And he also had a Jewish name, Cohen. His name was Moshe Cohen. So his name was also in that direction. So he had trouble with jobs and supporting his family, and nothing came from Britain. So he finally went to Oshawa, Ontario, where he got a job as an engineer, and he was electrocuted by accident. When my husband only saw him when he was 1 year old, and after that the man was in the Air Force, and then he got electrocuted. So he lost this beloved father that he always was intrigued by. He always gravitated towards fatherly figures. Bethe was about 10 years older. Fermi, about 1.5 dozen years older. Oppenheimer, he always gravitated to older physicists. And I think that's one of the reasons, because he always missed having a father figure. All the men in that family died. The Canadian grandmother that brought him up and got him the education, her husband died while she was still pregnant with her 4th child. In that family, men didn't last very long. That's why it's a miracle that my man made it to 96. But I think I have something to do with that. Not only did we have a fantastic life together, I also did the shopping, and I controlled the food. So I'm very much into health food, And so him getting up to age 96 is quite unusual in that family, because they all died in their 30s, the men. His brother died very young too, due to the wrong food. He had some heart attack very young. So anyway, there's a history of men dying young and the women being stuck without the men. His grandmother in England, her name was Jones Cohen, and then she married a Mr. Christie, who was incredibly wealthy, and he had left Germany, probably due to all the reasons that my family left Germany, and immigrated to England. And he was very technically apt. His father had immigrated, actually he was born in England, the father had immigrated, and he had made surgical instruments, so the family was very well to do in England due to the surgical instrument discoveries. And the son worked in textile machinery business, importing them, so they were very wealthy. So this grandmother in England, who had a pretty rough time, because her husband died also young, leaving her with toddlers 5, 3, and 1, and she had a terrible time too. She married this older man in his 50s who was incredibly wealthy, this Mr. Christy. And that's where the name Christy comes from. So this father, who couldn't get jobs in England, this Moshe Cohen, he changed his name to Christy to help him get a job. And so my husband was born as Cohen, but later he became a Christy. So that's where the name Christy comes from. It was by marriage, and it was not by but a German background. So my husband was stuck with German wives twice, and then this Christy name, which came from Germany. And all these talents came from there. So he grew up without a father in the Big Depression. It was hard. Only one aunt had a job as a secretary, and she supplied many people with her meager income. And my husband had to work when he was 10 years old. His mother died at home after surgery on the thyroid. He had piano classes till then. They went to a horse farm. He had a nice life. His mother managed a nice life with what her husband had left behind. Insurance money, a little bit of workman's comp, a little bit of money he had here and there. So they had a pretty decent time with luxuries. She bought a very nice house in a very good area of Vancouver. But when she all of a sudden was found dead in the bed due to a third surgery of thyroid when she was sent home, the children were left with nobody, no father and no money in a depression. 2 little boys, older brother and himself. And the grandmother then moved into the house and took care of them and made sure that they got an education. And that was, there was a solution for the problem. And then when my husband was 21, that was in 1937, was still Depression time, his grandmother from England sent a lot of money. She sent these $10,000 that had been promised in the contract, hoping that the young men could use it for their education. But what did my husband do? He got 5 and the brother got 5. It was enough money to buy several houses to rent, to have some income, because that's what I did. I had 4 houses with the money for the 5th. He could run the same in Depression. He gave every penny away. This is one of the reasons I married him. He was so incredibly selfless and generous. Himself at Berkeley, he worked as a waiter just to get some free milk and some rice. He didn't have much to eat. And he gave every penny in that period to his maternal grandmother so that she could eat. And he did that kind of thing, which is totally contrast from what my father did with us, again and again. When his wife wanted to move out, and she asked for divorce, he didn't do it, it was her. He asked her, "What do you want? How can I help you?" He had a salary at that time as a professor of Caltech, this was 1969, 1970, $26,000 gross. He had a little bit from consultation at RAND and Atomic Energy Commissions and who knows what, so he got a little bit above that, but it was still maybe 28. He had to pay $7,000 in income tax. So he ended up around, in the early 20s, he gave her between $13,000 and $14,000. She had more money than he did. That's why he couldn't marry me, he had no money. He went to his first wife. And then he said, "Do you want all the savings we have, or do you want to have a house?" She said, "Well, the house needs a lot of repair. There's roofing leaks, and she was a heavy smoker, it was all smoked up. It needs a lot of things. You keep the house with all the damage. I want the money." So she got all the money, which was worth a lot more than the house. This is what he did, starting when he was a student, and he did this all his life. With his sons, he wouldn't go and eat with his colleagues so he could pay the private tuition for Harvard and for another college the other son went to. He bought himself $6 shoes so that he could have a good life for his sons. He did that. He was incredibly selfless. Everywhere I looked. And that's why he broke off with me, because he knew I wanted children. He couldn't afford another child. He knew how much the first ones cost. After being involved in the weapons of the Second World War, he didn't want any more weapons to be built. He was active in all these things against terror. He didn't want the hydrogen bomb, the super bomb, which was much stronger than the little Christie bomb. He didn't want all this testing in the upper atmosphere, and he was partially successful there. He worked on that for decades. He thought we should exchange things with the Russians so there wouldn't be this race. And he actually had a thing with the Atomic Energy Commission, like Oppenheimer, which is generally not known. I have it on the table here. He was put into an interview whether he was a possible spy, whether he was trustworthy, but unlike Oppenheimer, he survived and he continued giving classified information to the Atomic Energy. It was the Atomic Energy Commission that made all the trouble for Oppenheimer the year before. And that didn't happen in 54. That started already in 49. Because of Oppenheimer's views. But Christie had the same views. But he sailed through it. He didn't have a teller on the other end. And he did things differently than Oppenheimer did. And I've read it several times, and I applaud how he handled it. So he was considered clear, and he could continue working at the top level of these secrets. But he worked all his life on eliminating weapons and testing of weapons. And Harold Brown did the same. His new boss at Caltech, the new president, he was had been Secretary of the Air Force in Vietnam. So he was very much tied up with the military. And later he became the Secretary of the Defense of all military in the US. That's why he left Caltech. That was his, and the reason he wanted to have that job, Secretary of Defense, is to stop the arms race, to stop this weapons production. He was on the same wavelength like Oppenheimer and like Christie. So my husband had a good reason to work with Harold Brown, because together they tried to stop the weapons development. And they did. Harold Brown constantly would travel to Helsinki, where he would talk with Russian delegations, and he would travel to Vienna, and Christie would be stuck at home doing the provost job, which meant all the professorial stuff and the money. And Harold Brown would be up. I have many letters where he says, Harold's gone again for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, where Christie was the acting president and the provost at the same time. So this went on for many years, from 1970 till the Carter election in 76. And then he was gone, not for 6 weeks or so, he was gone for months at a time. And then Christie handled things too, and then afterwards he became the interim president. He used to call Harold in Helsinki and what would you like me to do here? Because he was the president. What is your decision? They were always in the same wavelength. They always had the same, they were a very compatible pair. But it was, there's several reasons my husband went out of theoretical physics. One of them to support his first wife with 2 households, and at a high level. And she wasn't thrown into poverty like my mother was. And secondly, for the arms control race, he worked on this all his life. So that was very important to him. And he continued in that direction even in his retirement years. He did strange stuff when he was in the administration of Caltech. He wanted young blood to come here, and Caltech was in the hole financially. They had hired too many professors, and they were in the hole. The expenditures were bigger than the income. So my husband started an austerity program together with Harold Brown when they were at the administration. No more hiring of professors, no more hiring of secretaries. All the postdocs like me, we had to pay for it too. Our pension fund was cut to 0. Yeah, it was a sacrifice, and for me too. In any case, they wanted to get Caltech into the black, which Washington hasn't done very often, but Caltech did. They got it, Christie and Brown got into the black, and in that period, he wanted the professors to retire at age 65, so that they would have money for the young people coming in, young professors who are most dynamic, and to save money. And he figured Social Security should start paying our retirees at age 65. So actually, Caltech professors would have more income if they retired, and they didn't have to do teaching, they didn't have to do research, they had no committee work. Good life. They had a life of what they wanted to do, and more money with the Washington Social Security money. So he was able to persuade a lot of Caltech professors to take this retirement at age 65. The strange thing is he never took it. Here he made a policy, but he worked into his late 80s on a big thing with Japan. He felt very strong about that. I'll get to this later. So he did many strange things. He didn't. The word was out not to hire young professors because Caltech was trying to get into the black financially. What does he do? He gives lots of money to Kip Thorne, $2 million in those days, so that Kip Thorne could start the gravitational wave detection experiment, which was something, it was a dream in those days. They were so far away. And the money from Caltech, I just learned, we had this lecture on the 27th, Kip Thorne and my husband's professor thing. That money from little Caltech went all the way to the Soviet Union to support starving scientists there who didn't get support on this experiment. And to MIT, where they didn't have much money. I just learned that. So in this time that Caltech was in the hole, the money that my husband squeezed out went far. But that was his philosophy, that we are an international community and we got to help each other, even if it's the Soviet Union. Then the other thing he did is he hired Drever, who was the expert. Kip was a theorist. We needed an experiment. So in a time of hardship, he makes an exception and Ron Drever gets hired to get the experiment going. And they built a little lean-to. They couldn't afford a big building, so they built a lean-to with just one wall, 40 meters, and 2 doors and a cheap little roof. That's how it started, 40 meters. The instrument where they finally detected it, 100 years after Einstein had predicted it, Einstein predicted in 1915, Caltech detected it in 2015, exactly 100 years later in September, was 4 kilometers long. It had the side of the handfoot. Handfoot was the thing that was developed in Washington State to prepare the plutonium for the Christie gadget. You know, it's such a small world. The site was polluted. They couldn't do much, so they built the gravitational wave experiment there. 4 kilometers in one direction plus another direction, and they thought they might have a fluke observation, so they built another one in Louisiana, somewhere there, so that if both would detect it, then they would believe it. Well, it did happen. And they now have about 10 detections already since then. Anyway, that's a talk we just had a few weeks ago where we got the details. But my husband did this hiring in the most difficult time. When my husband came to Caltech, there were only 10 professors in physics. Caltech was a very quiet place. It wasn't like Berkeley. It wasn't like Princeton. It wasn't like MIT. It was a very quiet place. And of these 10 professors in physics, one was Oppenheimer, who was the only theorist part-time. He only came here for the spring semester. The other 9 semesters he would be in Berkeley or on the east somewhere. And then they had 9 experimentalists. So the total of 10 professors. And my husband got his job because Feynman always said, my husband is one of the best in the world. That's how he would describe him. And he wanted Christie to get Oppenheimer's job at Caltech. So when Oppenheimer felt he had to be more near Washington to help control things, he recommended Christie to get his job here, and Christie got it. So that was in 1946, after Los Alamos and after Chicago. So there was there were 10 professors here. In this period when Caltech was under austerity, no hiring was going on, he hired Pulitzer, who got the Nobel Prize. He hired a whole bunch of people in that period. Drever, he did not get the Nobel Prize. There were, I can't think of the names right now, but these people that he hired brought 4 Nobel Prizes to Caltech. One was in chemistry, Ahmed Swail. He was hired in that period also. But at the time he was ready to retire, at that time was 70, not 65, the physics department he'd built up from 10 professors to nearly 70. And he had brought a whole bunch of Nobel Prizes to physics We have more in physics than in any other department at Caltech. We have 38 Nobel Prizes now, among a faculty less than 300. Mossbauer, he was here also as a guest from Munich. He got a Nobel Prize too because my husband recognized. Feynman was one of those, of course, that my husband hired together. Gell-Mann, now I remember the name. Feynman first, then Gell-Mann, then came von Politzer, who wrote for my little thing in my book too. Willy Fowler got one too, but that was experimental, had nothing to do with Christie. But and then Ahmed Swail in chemistry. Yes, these were all people that he hired when there was no money. So he did strange things like this all his life. He went against the wave, against the reputations, against his own rules. He knew how to break rules. I was one of them. When marrying me was very courageous. And it was wonderful. This is what something he did all his life. He went against the rules. Today's administration, they make rules or they have inherited rules and they follow them slavishly. Christie never followed rules slavishly. He made his own and he broke them. And then he went back to his rules. So this is something about the man. What else could I help you with? Oppenheimer or Hans Bethe or Feynman, I think you said?
Sure.
Serber? Well, Oppenheimer, he considered a natural leader. And he called him a god. And Oppenheimer didn't just share physics, he shared his other things in life, his poetry, his political opinions. He cared for them as people. And for example, when Feynman was asked to come to Los Alamos, he remembered that Feynman had a very sick wife with an incurable disease, tuberculosis, and he didn't want to separate the young couple. So he had done some investigation how to put her into a hospital where she would live in Albuquerque, which was 2 hours away by car. But when Oppenheimer invited Feynman to come, he immediately had something lined up helpful for the wife too. And he did that for everybody. He always remembered their wives and their personal problems, and he tried to look after them, which most people don't. He was very caring. He was charismatic. My husband called him charismatic. And he was extremely upset that that the injustice would be done to him. My husband shared a house with Teller, so he knew him very well. After Los Alamos, housing was very difficult in the United States because nothing was built during the Second World War. Everything went into the military, all the funding and so on. And so when they went back to Chicago, Teller and Christie, they rented a mansion together. And they both lived in the mansion. There was a main kitchen, and then there was a butler's pantry, and Christie and his young wife took the butler's pantry for their kitchen, and Teller got the big kitchen, and they divided up the floors. One floor that Christie got with his 2 little babies, the other one Teller got. So they housed a lot of physicists coming through to Chicago. There was a lot of upheaval after the Second World War, and housing was difficult, and they were basically a free hotel to the physicists wanting to come to Chicago. Chicago was a very lively place. That's where Fermi was, and Wigner, and many of the other greats, Szilard. It was a fascinating place. Caltech was very quiet in those days. And I'm surprised my husband didn't stay in Chicago. He wanted to stay in Chicago. It was his wife, his first wife, who said, no, let's go to California. She was the one who picked it, and he always followed his wife. What she said was his command. He got a job in Santa Cruz in '66, or was it '67, somewhere there. He asked her, I would like to take this job. Should I? She said, no, we stay at Caltech. So he came back to Caltech. So he gave her a lot of freedom in his life. But they had a good relationship in many ways, like camaraderie, But as far as Oppenheimer goes, he was always very upset that Oppenheimer was treated so unjustly just because of someone else, Teller's comment. But it wasn't just Teller, others before him had already. He refused people like Strauss for the rest of his life. He wouldn't sign letters, he wouldn't go to any place where Strauss was involved. He was very upset about Strauss, what he had engineered for Oppenheimer. So he was very loyal to the very end. I was surprised he also suggested General Groves for the Fermi Award, because he felt Groves was an incredibly skilled leader. Not many people would have been able to pull off what he did. Groves knew how to make exceptions too, like Christie. You know, he let these physicists get away a lot in this top secret place. And Feynman, he was always having fun. He was cracking safes, he was going around the guards and coming in there multiple times. He always had fun there. And Groves must have been aware of these things, but he let it go. Feynman was such an important part of the project. He closed his eyes in many things, like Oppenheimer would have done also. So they worked very well together, just like Brown and Christie worked well together for the arms control business and the administration of Caltech and all the rest. So those two worked very well together. So after Oppenheimer got the award shortly before he died, he wanted Groves to get the award, but people didn't go along. So he very much respected Groves. The people had a lot of fun at Los Alamos. The European scientists that had left Germany and Italy and Switzerland, they knew how to do a lot of things in nature. They knew how to hike. The physics in Göttingen was always done in the hills around Göttingen. And they continued that in Los Alamos, a beautiful area. They did a lot of hiking. They did cross-country skiing. They had no lifts. And a funny story about Oppenheimer. He gave my husband, no, they didn't ride horses. Oppenheimer rode horses, and he had a little horse farm there. And he gave half a horse to my husband and half a horse to the son of a scientist. And they were always arguing, the two people who owned half and half, who had to clean up daily in the back and who had to put up the money for the front to feed the front. So they had jokes going on like this all the time. But Oppenheimer took Christie on horseback riding trips. Christie didn't know how to ride. He barely stayed on. Sometimes they almost parted company when Christie wanted to go one way, but the horse wanted to go the other way. And but Oppenheimer could ride okay. So they did physics on horseback. They designed the atomic bombs on horseback, which to me was very interesting because I come from the horse background too. So not many people know about that. They did talking on horseback. And he would ride almost into Colorado, Oppenheimer, especially with his brother, also Frank and so on. They had big horse experience. Well, Christie was the only one of the scientists that I know was willing to do this. So this is a little story you might enjoy. The horseback story, and doing physics on horseback. Anyway, I understand they worked very hard, long days, 10, 12, 14-hour days at Los Alamos, but they took off sometime too, into the neighborhood, hiking and skiing, and the Europeans brought that with them, Szilard and Bethe and all those people. They were accustomed to doing that in Europe. So they learned a lot, the young American scientists, like my husband, that's where they picked it up, and they continued this all their life. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the water that I just served you. They all loved nature. Feynman used to sleep under the trees in Los Alamos. In 1983, when it was the first trip that these people would meet each other again, it was a 40-year reunion from 1943, plus 40 makes 83. So they were getting together. And I think it's the last time they all got together. And I went there for the first time also in 83, and that's, Feynman asked me before, Feynman and I, we always had a very intriguing relationship. I was always intrigued by him, and he was always intrigued by me. So we liked to spend time together. He used to park in front of our house here on Arden Road, and we walked together to Caltech, and he would stop at the stoplight, and he would ask me strange questions, and he couldn't cross the street until he had his question answered, So we always had many conversations, and when we went to Los Alamos, and we were planning that trip in 83, Feynman asked me, can I sit next to you in the airplane? It's a very difficult trip for me to go back to Los Alamos, because that's where I had the time with my big love. And then when he said, could you sit next to me in the taxi as we passed that hospital where Aline and I used cooked together. We had a barbecue thing and we would play husband and wife next to the road, next to the hospital, and just try to make out as much life as they could. So when we finally got to Los Alamos, he asked me if I could sit next to him because it was a very emotional trip for him. And he said, do you see those pine trees over there? I used to sleep under them. Or we would pass something on the road on the taxi going, it's a 2-hour trip from the airport in Albuquerque to Los Alamos. He says, now this is where I used to stand in the street corner, thumb up, trying to get a ride to see my wife. And nobody had cars, they were not paid enough. The one who had a car was Klaus Fuchs, the spy. He had a car. And Feynman used to say, well, Fuchs was nice, he let me use his car so I could get to the hospital, you know. And there were many stories about that car and when things went wrong and so on. But later, when my husband got in somewhat of a depression, I would say, professional depression, I said, we got to do something to get you out of this. This was around 1980. He had been provost from 1970 to 1980, and he felt he'd lost his connection to his big love, theoretical physics. He couldn't get back. He didn't enjoy the teaching anymore. He didn't enjoy the students anymore that he enjoyed before. He didn't have the right things. He didn't go to meetings anymore. He had just lost his connection and he was depressed. So I said, you know, there are ways to deal with this. Why don't we do something wild? Why don't we take a big loan on our house and we buy something that you always wanted? You always wanted to go back to Los Alamos and buy some land there and go hiking there again, like your colleagues have done. Some of his colleagues did do it. Professor Walker did that and a couple others. I said, no, I'm not, it's too much trouble going with the children to Los Alamos, and we had all these dogs and so on, and can't take the dogs on an airplane so easily. So we thought we'd learn how to fly. We could use a JPL plane, if he and I could fly. But I said, you know, they come down so often, these little planes, and then with the dogs and so on, it's not the good thing. Why don't you buy something within driving distance where you can pack everything in, the children, their friends, the dogs, everything. And he always wanted something near Mammoth. He used to ski with Harold Brown, skied there too. I said, well, there's more skiing there, but he found a place close to LA, 90 minutes from Caltech. And so it's easy to go there on Sunday afternoon, be back that same night. You know, you can go there for half a day. And you can pack horses and everything, you know, dogs and children and everything. And so we found this place, which is a private mountain valley. It had no house on it. We couldn't afford anything with a house. It was just a lot of land embedded in national forest, very much like Los Alamos. So we made a bid on it and we got it. And that water that you're drinking, there are 48 springs on that particular piece of land, comes from those springs. There's no fluorine, no chlorine. It's granite mountain water. The mountains go up to roughly 9,000 feet. We had 6,000. And so there's lots of snow melt from granite and so on. And so we bought that place to get him out of the depression. And it helped. It made a huge difference. And later, Feynman went there too. Feynman used to tell me about, you know, how he slept under the trees in Los Alamos. Well, we slept under the trees there. There was no house there. We didn't have a trailer. So we slept under the trees with $8 tarps, just like they did in Los Alamos. And I used to worry a little bit because it's embedded in national forest and there's bears around, brown bears. And there's coyotes and lots of birds and there's mountain lions, pretty good sized mountain lions. And Christy said, oh, that doesn't bother him. That didn't bother Feynman either. They could sleep in the middle of nowhere. And he said he went to a meeting once and slept outside and he had a bottle with drinking water next to his head. In the morning when he came up, he saw that a bear had visited him in the drinking water and had made holes in the drinking water to suck it out, but didn't touch him. So he always told me the story that they're not interested in us, they're interested in, you know, candies and water and stuff like this. So yes, the water that you're drinking, I just use these bottles to fill it up, a glass bottle. I fill up about 100 bottles when I go. We now have a house and we have everything there. We built the house. And Feynman went there several times, sleeping like Los Alamos under our place. And then later, he wanted to own a place like this himself. So the nearby mountains, there are cottages, and he bought himself one little piece of land there with a little cottage on the hill and no road. And he would have a wheelbarrow to put his groceries in, to take it by wheelbarrow through the bushes up to his little cabin. And he had that just before he died. He didn't enjoy it very long. So that's a little story on Feynman. Another story I wanted to tell you about Feynman. I met him eating where the students eat in the Christie of Caltech. I never used to go where the professors eat. I always ate with the students when I was a postdoc here. And Feynman chose to eat there too. He was always interested in students. So we met, among the students, and I was new here, so he would immediately zero in on me, and he wanted to know what you do at Caltech, and he started throwing physics questions on neutrinos on me, because he knew I was in Willy Fowler's laboratory, and what are you doing about the neutrinos? And I said, Professor Feynman, I know nothing about the neutrinos, but I'm trying to find out. And then he never asked me another science question in all the conversations he had, but he asked me about everything else. He would ask me on my walks here from my house to Caltech, now tell me, Juliana, what is it between you and Bob that you still have that magic spark flying between the two of us? And I had never thought about that question. You know, what is it that our life is still so animated and there's such a force between us? And I didn't have an answer because I never thought about it. So and he didn't cross the street until I gave him an answer. And so what I told him is that, he gives me room to grow. He leaves me a lot of room in this relationship. And I think that's one of the reasons the spark is still here. And he was quiet, very quiet. He would come to every invitation I had. When I later was getting engaged to Christy and then married, and Christy would give a lot of dinners, and I was then the hostess. So just before we married, there was one of these events, and I always liked candlelight. Coming from Europe, I like candlelight. So I would have no electric light. It was all candlelight at my wedding, at dinners I gave later in this house. Many, many candles. And so the one dinner that I came to, that Feynman came to at the beginning, I had a big bowl, glass bowl with water in it, and there were flames coming out. And then I had these little seed petals, little leaves of flowers floating around. And he got down on hands and knees and he says, Juliana, how did you get the flame going in water? And I says, well, you figure it out. So he would get down on the hands and knees and look from the bottom and would look on the top. And I finally had to tell them. There were it was pretty dark, there were little plastic dishes in there that you wouldn't see any color. And there was a tiny wick in there. And I had put a match to the tiny wicks, and then I had hid things with rose petals. And he had to get to the bottom of it. So that's another story that I enjoy about it. When he had his big surgery, his cancer surgery, he explained it all to me in great detail. This was at Los Alamos that we sat at the table. He said, Juliana, they took this big chunk out of my thigh here, and they put it in here. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he went to the hospital here in Pasadena, the Huntington Hospital it was called at the time. And he went to the library, and he studied the original papers in the jargon in medicine. And he figured out the solution to cancer himself. He wasn't going to trust cancer experts. And later, when cancer hit me, I did exactly the same thing. I had cancer starting the breast, like for many women, but then I let it go too long. So I had tumors not only in the lymph, but I had tumors in the kidney and in the liver. And I wanted to live, just like Feynman wanted to live. Because my husband, we had a good relationship. I wanted to live for him. So I went in Feynman's footsteps, and I went to the Huntington Hospital, which is only a few miles away, and I went to the library there, and I studied about chemo, radiation, surgery, just like he had done. And he came to the conclusion that chemo wasn't going to do much. He had cancer up here. There was another famous physicist who had the same, Fermi, had the same thing in the 50s. He also had cancer in the upper abdomen here in the stomach. Anyway, Feynman figured out that chemo would be only a few percent, it wasn't worth it, and radiation wouldn't do it either. It had to be a drastic surgery. So he showed me how, oh, that was cut away, and he was very dramatic about it. He was an actor, and how it was stuffed in here, you know, and they stuffed this full with other stuff. And when he had that surgery, he only wanted Caltech blood. He was type O, which is not the most common blood, and all of Caltech was ready to donate. It was a big deal, and he made it. He made it. This was around 1980. I had a big thing going here once, and he didn't come because he was facing the cancer doctors and so on, and you know, he had that. But then later he got cancer again. It came back. And what he hated the most is administration in Washington. And then we had the Challenger 7 accident, where 7 astronauts were killed. And there was a committee to find out what went wrong, this Challenger 7 thing, and they were all NASA paid people. And you couldn't persuade Feynman to say anything that he didn't believe in. He was very honest about everything, even if it was unpopular. And so his wife persuaded him that he has to go to Washington, and he has to sit on the committee, and he has to get to the truth, why things went wrong that far. And that basically killed him. Because he worked 15 hours a day, he went to the laboratories, interviewed low-down engineers, and they took too much of a gamble with this O-ring. There was a high probability that the O-ring would go wrong and that the whole thing would come down and people would die. That was well established, but the administration wanted to keep their time schedule, and they were saying, oh, the probability is so little and we'll just go ahead anyway, and then it happened. So when they had finally an interview where they were all telling what went wrong, the NASA people all said the same thing, and he had his own interview, and he stated what he had found out, what was the case. But it was so difficult in him that the cancer came back, and he died not too long after that. I think he would have lived had he looked out more for himself. But his wife, his third wife, he was married 3 times, she persuaded him that he had to make the service to the country. When my boss, Willie Fowler, got the Nobel Prize in '83, I was trying, he wasn't home, he was in Chicago somewhere, Yerkes Observatory somewhere. I wanted to do something special before he got home. He was expected home on a Friday, and it was announced on Thursday that he got the Nobel Prize. So I wanted to do something for him. So I decided a banner would be a good thing. The highest building is 10 feet tall, 10 stories high at Caltech, and I figured I couldn't afford the banner, and it would be professionally made. No, I wanted to do something homemade. So I figured I could afford bed sheets, so I bought 8 king-size bed sheets, and then made stencils with the students of Caltech, 8 feet big, 2 feet wide, and maybe said, whoopee, it's just a horse song, really, you know, alliteration. While I was doing this banner, Feynman came by, and we were working on it, the students and I, and he said, Juliana, what's going on? I said, do you know Willie got the Nobel Prize? And this was a big surprise. And because Nobel did not like to give them anything connected to astronomy and astrophysics, because he had this lady friend and she had a romance with an astronomer or astrophysicist, something like this. So none of his money would ever go in that direction. And Willie's was in for that direction, nuclear reactions in stars and stuff like this, element creation in stars. This was against Mr. Nobel's direction, so we were very surprised, not that he didn't deserve it, that he got it for that subject. So Feynman comes by, sees us working on it, and I said, he got the Nobel Prize against all expectations. He was so happy, he was jumping with joy. And then later, when he got very ill after going to Washington and finding out about these astronauts, I did it for him too. And I figured I had to do it for him. And I heard that he was supposed to go through, he only had 1 kidney. It had been operated out due to this cancer business. And 7 years later, he died, exactly like my husband. My husband only had 1 kidney too. They both died exactly 7 years later. I don't know why, but that is what I observed. So he was supposed to have this kidney treatment ever so often. And what is it called again?
Dialysis.
Dialysis, right. He had his first dialysis on a Thursday. And he figured out that he could get another 6 months of life, they told him, out of this. So after his first treatment, he decided 6 months of life isn't worth it for this stuff he would go through. In addition to that, he always told me he always talked about his father. He had a fascination with his father and his son. He was a very good son to the only child he had, and then Michelle was adopted, of course. But he always talked about the father in his walks to me, that he died so young, and that he expected to die young too. He always predicted his death. His father died in his 50s, and Feynman died when he was 69. Expecting it. He almost pushed it, I would say. And so when he had this dialysis, he figured it's not worth it to go through that for another 6 months when he was expecting to die young anyway. He was 69 already, 10 years more than his father. So I learned on Friday morning, my husband comes home at 11 o'clock to pick up something, we're only 3 doors from his office. And he says, guess what, Feynman decided to die. He doesn't want to go through these treatments anymore. There's always an, oh my, don't like it. And I got to do something for him. The banner that he liked so much for Willie Fowler, we got to do that for him. So that was just before 12 o'clock, so I marched over to the student houses where we had good climbers. Those climbers, they sat in hammocks doing their homework, and they were well known going to the mountains and doing difficult climbing, because I'm not a climber. And it's a very difficult project doing this thing. The 10th floor doesn't go to the top. The top is the 9th floor. Then you've got to get ladders up there for one, and you have to carry them up. They don't fit in an elevator. And then you have to, the building kind of projects out many feet. You have to lean over and get that thing over. And when we did it for Willie Fowler, we went to the construction sites of Caltech, and we borrowed PVC pipes to put them in so that it would not fly in the wind. And they fell out. Could have killed someone from up there. So I asked Christy to help me. That's the only joint publication we ever did, would be Willie. So Christy, you got to help me with this. How do we prevent this thing from flying and flipping? He says we use ropes. We sew on ropes, and we take ropes from 9 stories down, and we anchor it in the floor, and that thing will be rigid up there. It won't go anywhere. So, and I had the president of Caltech. I told him what I was doing with the students, and he was down there, and he was praying that nothing would happen. I did it with the permission of the administration. Anyway, when Feynman's thing came, I went to the same student house, new students. This was in 68, and before it was 83, so new students, they turn over every 4 years. And I said, will you help, I'm not a climber, getting these banners up there so Feynman can still have a smile on his face. He'd like a practical joke. And I knew he was at UCLA, and then I called the photographer, Caltech. I said, can you make a good picture of this and make a print immediately in an 8x10 print or something big. Let's get it down to his hospital bed so he can smile. And I wanted to put on it, we love you, Dick. So that's a lot, much more than would be really. And so I got the students to agree, and so we did it. And we were ready before it got dark to start mounting it, because Feynman was predicted to die by Saturday evening, and I wanted to get it down Saturday morning before he died. And I needed a photographer, and the whole works Saturday morning with the sunshine, we're going to do it. So I went to the secretary of Feynman and Christy, they always had the same secretary. I said, Helen Tuck, I'm doing this, I just want you to know, and we're going to get a picture down to Feynman tomorrow. She says, Juliana, if you do this, I'll never talk to you another day of your life. I said, why? I want a smile out of him. She says, you must leave the family in peace. He's dying, he wants to spend the last hours with his family. And when you put this big thing up, 8 sheets, king session, somebody is going to get in the newspapers and he won't have any peace. They'll come down to the hospital and bother the family. You can't do it. I said, okay, makes sense, I won't do it. He says, you can do it after he died. As an expression of Caltech feeling towards him. So, Christy, he didn't die Saturday night. He didn't die Sunday night. He didn't die Monday. And then on Tuesday morning, the LA Times, my husband comes back with the Feynman died last night late. So then I went to the student houses shortly after. They're all sleeping at 7 o'clock. It's dangerous. So we got a man from JPL who's accustomed going to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. Our students show up anytime they want. They're up half the night. And then later we got the students involved and we did it. And I'm very proud of that, how it all happened. And later, we didn't tie it down with Christie ropes. Later, the wind disturbed it and it became like a ghost flying in the wind. So I want to show it to you later. Okay. Anyway, that is another Feynman episode. And Feynman had a daughter, Michelle. She loved horses like we did. And we ended up in the same stable. But she had a horse that she called Sir. And we had other horses. We had 2 horses. We had different names. Anyway, we used to talk to each other because of the horse business. Yes, and he used to go out of it. He was not a horse person. Feynman was not very athletic. He walked, and he slept under trees, but he did not go into the waves. He did not go skiing. All of that was not his cup of tea. He would go out of his way. He used to park his car right in front of our house. It was the most smartest car of the period. Very humble car, because his money would go to Sir. He strongly supported Michelle in whatever she wanted to do. When he gave talks in Greece, he would come back and he would have a most beautiful little statue from Greece, for a horse statue for his daughter. He was a very loving father, all I could judge, for his son. He used to walk early in the mornings with his son, explaining physics to him, just like his old father had explained physics to him. He wanted to continue this tradition, and he went out of his way to support whatever Michelle wanted to do. So I always admired him as a father, and he didn't accept any invitation that I gave him unless he had checked with his wife, Gwyneth. She was in control, just like my husband's first wife. She controlled where he would work, and all the other details. He controlled the physics, and she controlled the life. It was the same thing with Feynman's wife. They had a very good relationship, and he very much respected her and let her have whatever she wanted. He always talks about his big love, but I saw a very nice relationship that he had with Gwyneth. And when he died, she started traveling a lot. And she died within a year, because it was just too much. And they are buried in the same place where my husband is buried and where I'll be buried. I looked for a burial place before he died, and the place that I found was all filled up, and I didn't want him next to a freeway or anything. It's called Mountain View Cemetery. It's close to the mountains that Feynman always lived. It's a private cemetery, and it's close. Robert Christy always loved the mountains. And then I found there was a little path that these people used to walk on, and in that path they're making new graves available, where there never had been any graves, few steps away from Feynman. So I was able to buy a grave in this path, right next to another Caltech person called Rudy Marcus, another Canadian, whose wife had died before him with cancer, and she's buried there already. So you're right next to them, and then there's a road, and there's a couple more graves, and then it's Feynman, all in one exact line pointing towards Caltech. So I thought that is kind of strange how life goes that way. So what else do I want to say about Feynman? I have quite many memories with him again. Anyway, I admired him in many ways, and he was always on the same wavelength. As I was preparing myself for your visit today, I was reading all these challenging things that Christie started with arms control, and Simon would always be on the same side. They had the same opinions and so on about almost everything. They were like two brothers. And my husband went out of his way to have Feynman come here. And so did Bob Barker. They used Hollywood. They used that he could go to sabbatical for the first year to Brazil without coming to Caltech. And they used that he wouldn't have to have many students, that Christie would take the load of students, because Feynman always felt he could solve it so much faster than his students could. It was no fun working with students. So, but I looked up the number of students my husband had, and I figured he had one student every 4 years, PhD. I found the thesis. When he passed away, I had to get the boxes out of his office, and I found all these PhD theses that he had kept. Now I don't know what there was in addition to that, but what I found actual theses that he kept, one every 4 years. But then we looked into Feynman, who came here so that he wouldn't have to have so many students. He had one every 3 years. So he actually had more students than I can prove for my husband. And I don't know everything about my husband, but the little I found out, he had an amazing number of students. And I ran into one student, an eye doctor, that I liked very much. Well, this eye specialist was a student of Feynman. So he had impact in many different fields. And it was due to Feynman that I'm sitting here today and living after this cancer that I had. Because in my family, this is the predominant cause of death is cancer. My father died of cancer. My grandmother died of cancer. All our aunts, sisters died of cancer.
Yes,
yeah. So we have cancer in the family, you might say. And the cancer hit me 2003. I was done with it 2005. So I'm still here 14 years after getting rid of it, or, you know, it's quite a long time. And I went in Feynman's footsteps. I did what he did. So he went to the nearby hospital to study the probability, and read the original papers, don't ask an oncologist, get to the bottom yourself. And then I went to UCLA, just like he did, the 8th floor in UCLA where all the medical journals are, and I read the original papers. And then, like Feynman, I designed my own cure. Feynman had this big surgery in 1980 where he had multiple surgeons working on him, and when he was on the gurney being shoved into the surgery, he was still giving out orders to the surgeons. They were basically following his orders. And he said, this and this specialist should be there, some blood vein specialist has to be there. And he was totally right. Later one of his things broke, and that specialist was able to put it together again. He designed his own recovery. So when the cancer hit me, I did exactly the same thing. Huntington Hospital, UCLA, and that's why I'm here today. But I tried not to get into the stress that Feynman got into. You know, it was too much for him. His body was weak. But he was a very impressive man in many different ways. Bob Bacher, he was another man I have some little stories for. Bethe was in charge of the theoretical aspect of the atomic bomb, and Bacher was in charge of the practical aspects. And the first atomic bomb experiment, the one that exploded in Alamogordo, July, was it 16th, 1945, was brought not by the army, it was brought in the personal station wagon of Bob Bacher. He didn't trust anybody. Even though Caltech was a very quiet place when my husband accepted the job of Oppenheimer here, it became the center of the atomic bomb people. Not only did we get Bacher and Feynman, we got Bethe. He was here every year for many years, giving wonderful talks and you know, inspiring everyone around here. Many of the physicists ended up here, one way or the other, visiting or permanently. So at the station wagon, I had to tell you, he, of course, his car had another important role. He offered his car when Feynman was persuaded to visit from Cornell. He said, you can use my car to go to Hollywood. That was another thing that persuaded Feynman to break his ties to Hollywood. And then he got Bethe here. Feynman was very much, he also needed a fatherly figure, just like Christy did. And Bethe was a fatherly figure to him. So they got Bethe here too. That was Bob Bacher's thing too. I wanted to say a few words about Bethe. He was extremely nice to interact with. He was so humble, just like Christy. Oppenheimer was not humble. Oppenheimer would make you scared quite often with his intellect and put you right in the corner and so on. Oppenheimer used to talk so fast in his lectures that it took two people to follow a lecture. One would listen and one would write, and then later they exchanged things. Christy was one of the very few who had no pal. He listened and wrote at the same time. But Oppenheimer was challenging. Peter was so calm and easy to talk with. He was so supportive. I was a little nobody here at Caltech, and I went to accompany my husband to Hiroshima once, and I wanted to visit my own colleagues in astrophysics in Tokyo and in Kyoto. And when I visited my own colleagues, they showed me how they had made with a little home camera, inexpensive thing, a computer graphics movie of stuff that was going on in the generation of stars, formation of stars. I was so impressed with it. They did a shoestring budget that I came home. I said, if they can do it, we can do it. So I wanted to make a movie, computer graphic movies with my home camera. But then I got the JBL camera for free. They would cost tons of money, but they allowed me to use their camera, which was very nice of them. So I used a surf student, an undergraduate, and it wasn't a job for 8 weeks. The job went on for 1.5 years, but we got it done. And I showed the nuclear reactions inside stars, the runaway nuclear, not bombs, runaway nuclear explosions, and they repeat and repeat and repeat, and the sun's going to have one day like this too, and the sun's going to expand out to Earth. So I was showing what's happening in aging stars with these nuclear runaway reactions and the stars contracting and collapsing. And these are my calculations. And so when Bete came here, I thought, I'll let him see my own little computer graphics movie, you know. And he was so supportive. And he didn't demolish me with questions. He was just nice. And everybody felt that way about it. He did everything with brain and slide rules. He was famous for his slide rule. So were a few other physicists whose name, but he inspired people in that direction. He also, when he came here, he had lots of visitors always, and his office was always full of people where he was treating them very nicely. He gave excellent talks about the bombing, construction of the atomic bomb and this and that. But it was also very clear when we met privately that he missed his wife, Rose, terribly. She stayed home most of the time taking care of her older parents, and he needed a housekeeper. So he had another physicist, Jerry Brown, a student of Szilard, top physicist, be his housekeeper. So Brown made sure they had food in the house. Brown made sure about they shared an apartment just around the corner from Caltech. Brown took care of everything. I was very impressed always how one physicist would help another physicist when it came down to even daily jobs like that. Serber, I met him in 1983 when we went back after the 40th reunion. He also struck me, he was so humble and so nice. I've also found a lot of letters from him that strike me the same way. And he had a beautiful young wife there with a little child, a little boy, 2 years old. Now he was the generation of my husband, and also shows up with a young woman my age. I lost track of them. So that's the only interaction I had with him, but his letters were always very nice. These people were always inviting each other, and I found letters of Christy wanting Serber to come very much to Caltech, and he wouldn't come because his wife Carlotte didn't wish to drive and didn't want the upheaval of packing and all that. All these men gave a tremendous amount of everything to their wives. They were a very giving group, all of them. And I met many. Another incident in '83. Here were these scientists from the bomb construction meeting for the first time. Victor Weisskopf and many, many others were there. I met them for the first time. There was a protest going on by reporters outside, newspapers and other people outside the conference room to give hell to these people who had constructed the atomic bomb and all these weapons. It was a very negative protest for the people inside. And I was amazed. When they heard that all these people were outside with candles and throwing dirty words, they got up And they all marched out and they joined with these protesters and said, let us share the cans, we have the same opinion. To me that was shocking, that they kind of regretted what had come of the atomic bomb. I had many discussions with Christy on the atomic bomb business, because I came from Germany, and I witnessed as a toddler these bombs coming down, and as I was growing up, seeing all these buildings demolished, these brick buildings, and I had to walk along the ruins going shopping in Stuttgart and so on. So I had not very pleasant memories of these bombs. And I fear the bomb would have been thrown on Berlin, or I was close to that city that was totally destroyed almost, Dresden. It was not a military city, it was full of churches and castles and refugees. We were one of the refugees. So I had divided feelings on this bomb business. And I used to question my husband, you know, whether it was really necessary to get into this nuclear business. And he said yes. And Beta felt the same way. I discussed it with Beta too. Their argument was that they were trying to save American boys. That the war in the Pacific was so ugly. It was so destructive on American soldiers. And that there was this air bombing going on by this general who made these firebombs on Tokyo and many of the other cities, where they lost 100,000 or 90,000 in one night, because the house is out of wood in Japan, and they all burned. One atomic bomb was roughly one firebombing as far as loss of life goes. And in addition to that, the Japanese were defending their emperor. The generals claimed they could not give up because they wanted, the emperor was their god to them, and they had to save their god. And they didn't, the generals in Japan did not wish their emperor to suffer a similar fate as the generals of Hitler. So they would have fought to the bitter end. And its children, 10 years old, were already trained in the schools. When the American soldiers would land on the shores of Japan, which was planned pretty soon, that the children would get into the fight, the little boys with swords. It would have been a bloodbath of armed American boys against these little Japanese boys, a terrible bloodbath. And it was coming. Now, the bomb was built not for the Japanese. They didn't anticipate the Japanese war. That was a surprise to them. It was built because of the German war. And it was built because Hitler wanted to dominate the world, they thought. But coming from Germany, I know that isn't quite true. He wanted to get neighboring areas. He did not wish a war with England. He fought very hard not to get into war with England, but Churchill wanted that war. But in any case, he wanted to just get the boundaries for his people that had been taken away in the First World War and before. He wanted to get that. But people in this country thought he wanted world domination. Well, after he attacked, after the war with England happened, he probably would have gone further. Yes, there's no doubt about it. So, no doubt about it with me either. But the bomb was built against Hitler. And that's basically a good thing, because Hitler was terrible. And he was terrible to his own people, including us. My My grandfather was almost shot because of Hitler. He was not Jewish, because he was assisting people that you weren't allowed to assist for. You know, we Germans did good stuff too. So Hitler was a terrible menace. And my grandfather was always praying that somehow he would be gone sooner or later. But we had to suffer under him. You know, people tried to assassinate him. They were unsuccessful. So, yes, it was built against Hitler. And there was this notion that the center of physics was in Germany and that they could do it. It was discovered by Otto Hahn and Lise Meitner. And that they had the know-how, they had the manpower, and they had the uranium through Belgium that they would build an atomic bomb. And Bohr was pushing that also, or the first Bohr, Niels Bohr, he traveled here. And they were not wrong about that. He would have built it. The strange thing of fate is the Americans got their money in the Depression from the military budget. And the Germans used money from the military budget also, exact the same, to build an atomic bomb. But what the Americans didn't know, but what I know, is that most of the German scientists who were not Jewish, who were left behind, sympathized with the Jewish scientists who had to leave. Otto Hahn was hiding them in his own apartment. He was risking his own life. And there was an incredible camaraderie internationally in physics. And there were a few idiots who were not that way, but the majority, as far as I could tell when I went back, and I was at the Heisenberg Institute, and I met those people, and they were against Hitler. Heisenberg was almost disappeared like the Jewish scientist disappeared. Himself, without having Jewish blood, he almost disappeared. It was his mother who rescued him, I learned in Munich. A lady rescued his life, a mother. That's another story. I'm going to put that in this book. There's some very interesting history there. And I was just, when I went through my letters here for you, reading for the first time that Heisenberg, who was the center of physics in the world for a long time, before Oppenheimer became so prominent, he traveled, when he was still unmarried in 1930, to America. America was an idol for him. He traveled to China and some other countries, big trips. And he traveled to America again after Hitler was in power. And he actually went to see Oppenheimer at Berkeley. And he wanted to tell Berkeley, I'm not going to do it. But there was language communication problem. German, like Japan, is a very convoluted language. I can write a whole sentence for one page. You don't get to the point till you get to the verb at the end. English is very short and very direct, and you get to the point quickly. An educated German doesn't talk like that. An educated person talks, that's various levels of Japanese too. You have to talk at a level for your certain level. So he didn't communicate. And he was also being observed all the time, what he was doing in America in the Hitler time. But he was trying to tell Oppenheimer, I'm not going to do it. The other thing is he had just gotten married. He had a big flame who was an aristocrat connected to, his student, the one that also worked with him, von Weizsäcker. Was a big family in Germany, aristocratic family. They were very big in politics, they were very good in physics. Anyway, he was in love with a sister, I believe, of this von Weizsäcker family, or one of these people there, and he was turned down by the family, wasn't good enough. And he had a grudge for a long time, and then he finally found a lady, Elizabeth, who he married in the 30s, and they had, I think, 6 or so children. Very good marriage. She was a musician, a pianist like himself. He was all these German scientists were musicians, by the way. Anyway, they had a very good life together. And when you became an immigrant in the United States, you couldn't bring your family with you. It was just your wife and your children. So he actually was discussing with his wife Elizabeth whether they should leave Hitler Germany, just like the other physicists had done. And with his Nobel Prize, he could have gotten a job in Colombia, anywhere around there. He was actually contemplating doing it. And Elizabeth said, if my parents can't come, I can't go. So due to the parents, they stayed in Germany. And then, of course, the war came. This was 30s. He was in the States several times, and he came to the States. The war broke out for Germany, September 1, 1939. And he actually was in the States in the month before he had to go back, and he had to learn how to shoot himself and do army training. I don't think Oppenheimer ever had to do this, but Heisenberg did. And he made sure that Hitler would not get the atomic bomb. But I was arguing to the bitter end with Robert F. Christy about this. I could never persuade him. He stuck to his point. It was developed to throw in Hitler. Of course, then it wasn't necessary anymore. Germany capitulated in May 45. The bomb wasn't ready. But I agree with the Japanese. They had to, well, some ideas what they should have done, just an experiment in the air and show in Japan that they could do it. But the argument was it wouldn't have persuaded them. What the Americans should have done is persuaded Japan that there was nothing going to happen to the emperor. You know, the generals in Germany did bad stuff, but the emperor didn't. And they should have given them guarantee that he would be safeguarded and that nothing would happen to their god, which is the case. You know, after the war, nothing happened to the emperor, and he could still visit Washington many years later, and he stayed alive. He was not degraded in any way. So that was a mistake on the American side, that we wouldn't have all these weapons today. But of course, Christie didn't only work on weapons and trying to stop them, he worked also on nuclear energy generation. And he, with Fermi, was in that lab, and on December 242, they got the self-sustaining nuclear reaction going at Chicago. And then he worked with Fermi the next few months for the first nuclear reactor that developed at Argonne later. And he worked with nuclear reactors all his life. He went to meeting after meeting, and until his very end, he believed that that is a good source of energy, the sun and nuclear reactors. And the problem with the nuclear reactors was that they didn't do enough inspection and they didn't go enough into safety. It was a problem of the American government that they should have provided more funds to make these reactors perfectly safe. He felt that everything else was more unsafe than the nuclear reactors would have been. So he worked on that all his life. What he did at the end of his life, when most people retire, he was invited to be the head of a committee to figure out what happened in Japan with these only 2 bombs that exploded, you know, the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki one. And it was a very difficult project because this was 40 years later. He was given that job in 1982. So that's 40 years later. How do you figure out what happened 40 years before with radiation? There were so many shielding effects. First of all, when you picture the Christie gadget, they had this uranium, this plutonium at the center, the plutonium-239, and then they had a lot of dynamite around, the directed dynamite. And so these neutrons that came from the plutonium had to go through the dynamite. Now the dynamite consists of a whole bunch of different elements, and that gave off more neutrons, and they interacted with each other. Then it had to go through the iron shell, or whatever it was, and that made more neutrons and things that had to be studied. And then it went into the atmosphere with nitrogen and oxygen, and there were multiple interactions between all these neutrons and all the stuff that flew out. And it was a very complex. And then what would actually happen to people? You had to study the shielding of the houses and of clouds, and a lot of shielding calculations that are very, very difficult. And this thing went on is still going on. I can give you the telephone number of someone who's still working on it, Steve Egbert from the Science Applications International Corporation in San Diego. This was a big American project, and they collaborated with Japanese physicists, and they had 100,000 patients that they were studying, survivors, where they were and all the details or whatever they could figure out. And the end result was, after these very difficult things, they had to examine cement walls, they had to excavate dead people from the radiation and study their teeth. And they found an interesting thing that women are 3 times as susceptible to radiation as men are. If that's a radiation, women get hit 3 times as much. I never knew that before. Because radiation is used in every dentist's office and every medical clinic, you have radiation. Well, anyway, it affects women more than men. That's one of the things that came out. They said where the Hiroshima bomb fell, nobody could ever live there again. That territory was polluted for eternity. No, they built a nice hotel there in which we slept, and his life is going on there like before. It didn't last all that long. Then the 2 radiations which were kind of known to come out is neutrons, produced by the bomb, and gamma rays. And what the study found out under Marsman's direction is that the neutrons were not the main problem. It was the gamma rays, because the neutrons went into gamma rays, so the Fat Boy bomb in Nagasaki was mostly damaged due to gamma rays. And the same with the other one, the Hiroshima one. And that the Hiroshima bomb did not explode where they think it exploded. They couldn't fit observations from the ground. It exploded a little higher up. 25 feet or 25 meters, I forget, but it was a little higher. That made a significant difference for what happened below. So to the bitter end, my husband had certain opinions and he found out a lot of other stuff, you know. And he was very unusual in many different ways. He was so selfless, he was so giving, he loved his physics so much, he did so much for Caltech, he brought so many Nobel. It's not a quiet place anymore, it's a very lively place, and he made it so. And he was involved in the defense. I found letters that shocked me. You know, you needed 2 kiloton to defeat an airplane from the Soviet Union at 200 meters, or something like that, you know. All this defense stuff, on the defense of Europe he worked on. I mean, he didn't just work on physics and students and all that, and Caltech. He did an awful lot on international basis, and to eliminate bombs as much as he could, and the testing. So I think that's one of the best things of his life. And the students worshipped him. Just like Oppenheimer was worshipped by Christie and many of his associates, Christie's students worshipped him. He went out of his way helping them when they were ill, or this or that family problem, or inspiring them with this and that. He went out of his way. I think he was his nature, but he also took over Oppenheimer's ways. And you know about Teller and so on, right? That he became rather cool and didn't have much contact. My husband knew that I had this passion for horses, and in post-war Germany there was no way you could ride. The country was destroyed, so I had to start riding as an adult when your body's already pretty stiff and you know the fall isn't so easy. So he asked me when he wanted to keep me in California, what can I do to keep you in Los Angeles, which wasn't my first choice, with the smog and all the rest. I said, get me up on a horse. So we used to go to places in LA up on a horse, and then he asked the trustees, where do I take a young lady who wants to be up on a horse? And they told him about a ranch out in Northern California where they have 200 riding horses, and you ride every day, morning and afternoon. You don't have to cook, and everything's done for you. You just ride horses at different levels that you fit into. And that's where he took me to. We are still going there. And he was an incredible rider. There are these creeks that are 6 feet wide. He always used to jump them. And he rode a horse till he was 93 years old, holding hands with me. I was born, by the way, my husband married, as soon as he got the PhD, May the 30th, 41. I am born February 8, 42. If you make a subtraction, I was born 9 months after he married his first wife. It's a very strange coincidence.
Yes.
And to live through the German warfare, and then to marry one of the top people on this side of the warfare. I wrote a little thing a couple of years ago that I called on opposite sides of the fence. You know, in warfare you always have a fence. And I came from the opposite side. And both sides had heroes in it. Heisenberg, to me, is very much a hero. And I want to write a book on him too, because I know a lot. And how his mother got him out of the clutches of Hitler. How she did it. His name is Heisenberg, Heisenberg, Werner. He was the center of physics in Germany, and he trained many of the American physicists. I have a list there, but Teller was one of his students. Oppenheimer was also in Göttingen. He got his PhD, by the way, but not under Heisenberg, somebody else. But anyway, he was kind of the guru in Germany. And he very much wanted a professorship of Sommerfeld, was another great man in and he didn't get it because of his political views against Hitler. He did not get this position. So he was very bitter. And then shortly afterwards, he was called something, a derogatory word which meant the white Jew in Germany. That's what they called physicists who were not Jewish but who were against what Hitler was doing and were sympathizing with the others. And they were called white Jews. So it appeared in, I think, newspapers, and I must find all that stuff, that he was called a white Jew. That's one of the reasons he didn't get the Sommerfeld position. And it was clear that people were disappearing. It wasn't clear to my family. We lived close to Auschwitz. Later I lived close to Dachau, near Munich, when I went back. None of the local people seemed to know about these terrible places, Auschwitz and Dachau. Not from what I could learn. They knew something was going on, but they didn't know about the murderous stuff. They knew they were disappearing, but anyway, I never found out that anybody knew, or the circles that I was in. And anyway, people were disappearing. So they were expecting Heisenberg to disappear also, to an unknown place. And his mother feared for him. So his mother was a socialite. She did a lot of entertaining. So she went to she made an appointment with the mother of another giant in Germany. Can't think of his name right now, but he was in charge of the secret police. He caused all these criminal things. Mother didn't know. So this one mother of Heisenberg's goes to the mother of the chief of the secret police and said to her, "Do you remember our fathers used to be friends? They used to go hiking together in the Alps, and they had such similar interests. And you know, it would be nice if our boys could be nice to each other too." The mother of this terrible criminal did not know that his son was doing such things. And so the two women decided that their sons should be friendly with each other. And then Heisenberg's mother said, "Why don't you tell your son to be a nice boy and be nice to my boy?" That's how they talked. So the mother actually went out and talked to her boy, not knowing what criminal acts he was doing. And the boy sent out 2 letters, one to the military, which are historic things, which I'll put in my book, to spare Heisenberg. And another 2 letters are known, signed by him, to spare Heisenberg. And Heisenberg was spared. So these women did it. That's how important women can be. That's why Heisenberg was spared. And he did everything that nobody would else. There were 6 Kaiser Wilhelm institutions. Hahn, a chemist in Berlin, was in charge of one. And then there were others in physics. And he very much wanted the directorship of one Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. They had a lot of funding and so on. I think Einstein wasn't one of them. And then his student, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, why he didn't get his bride there, he was in charge of another physics institute. They were cahoots under the same wavelength. They were both against Hitler. And so they controlled 3 of the 6 Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes. That's a lot, and I don't know at the moment who the others were controlled by. And he did everything he could to have no bomb business in his institutes. There were 3, the chemistry one and the 2 physics one. I know a lot about that stuff and have a lot of evidence for it. I have 6 books there, written some of them in German that people don't read, but I can read them. And I'm going to use that, letters that he wrote to his parents, letters that he wrote to his wife, which all substantiates what I'm saying. But he had to be very careful. He would have been executed like this had it been known what he was doing. And he carried that thing through till he was imprisoned at Farm Hall in Britain. He was always claiming we needed too much uranium. And he covered up to the bitter end. But it was a cover-up that I see for letters to his wife and to his parents. And it's wonderful that people like that exist when you have a villain in a top government position who can order anything he wants to order, that you have some responsible parties among the people who do what they can do. That we need people like that in every country. And Germany certainly had him. I'm proud of him.
Did you know him personally?
A little bit. With the same institute. And he once came to the United States when I was here. He came to Caltech. And he was, I met him. I was very angry at my husband and at Caltech. We have very nice auditoriums there that he would get in Germany, everywhere. And they put him into a little classroom here where minor people come to give a minor talk. They did not give him any official, nice. Christy thought to the very end that Heisenberg was a villain. I could never persuade him. And they treated him in this way when he came to Caltech.
And that would be in the 50s, 60s?
Shortly before he died. It would have been in the 70s. And I went to his talk. And he knew how I was from Munich. I was engaged to the son of his co-director, Feynman. He knew very much who I was. And he met me here as the wife of Christie. And he was upset. So I saw a lot of upset on the Caltech side, but on his side too. I greeted him in German with the Bavarian greeting, which is normally not used anywhere else. Grüß Gott, it's greet God, it's a dialect form, and I try to do it in a dialect way. And he looked me over from scalp to toe, from toe. How could you do it? That's what he told me without words. He wouldn't take my hand. And I worship the man. That's life. I'm going to do some good for him still. How could you marry Christy?
Heisenberg.
Implied that to me. He didn't say it verbally, but his eyes told me that. And I was damn angry that he wasn't received in a way that he would have been received anywhere else, but it wasn't my doing. But that's life. He did do a lot that was very good. And it's an example for future countries to do likewise when they get into trouble in the administration.
Yes, there are lessons here.
Yes, yes. Things always repeat.
Yeah.
That stupid Hitler, why did he invade Russia? Napoleon's empire got killed that way. He does it again. It always repeats. Yeah.
So what do you think, you can answer this however you like, about how the role of women in science has changed over the course of your lifetime?
It has changed. It's better. We have between 20 and 30% women now at Caltech, and I'm grateful for everyone. But Stanford has over 50% where my students went. My oldest daughter got into Caltech and she turned it down as a protest because they're still not good enough to women. We have 2 division chairmen among 6, which is progress in chemistry, and in physics, the 1st division chairman. We still have a long ways to go. And we've only come part of the way. And the way they treated us at the beginning, like myself, or Catherine Sisarski, who was a big woman in science, or Beatrice Tinsley, who lost her life due to that, or Olga Taussky-Todd, who got the first professorships in mathematics at Caltech. Sad. Olga Taussky-Todd was married to a mathematician. She came from, I think, Hungary, and then she was educated in Vienna. And she went to England because she was also Jewish. From England she came to the United States, working in Washington somewhere, at the Bureau of Standards and so on. She desperately wanted a child. Later, when I met her in Pasadena, she used to ask me, Juliana, when we met in the supermarkets buying vegetables, let me hold your child. She could never have a child because she would have never gotten a job. And she cried about that all her life. So I let her hold my firstborn. Hold it as long as you want. And she was made the first professor at Caltech in science due to my husband. And I have a picture of her in my book. She had so many high awards from countries outside the United States. She had 300 papers published. She opened up whole new fields in mathematics, and she had a little postdoc, a low-down research position at Caltech. And I told Robert Caltech should be ashamed. And he made a quantum jump from a low-down research position. Her husband had the position, and then she became full professor. But it was near the end of her life. She sacrificed too much already. Another scientist that very much inspired me was Beatrice Tinsley. She came from New Zealand. She married an astronomer from New Zealand. They came to the United States. He got the position, just like what would have been with me in Peterbilt in Santa Cruz. She got the position in Texas. No, he got the position, and she had nothing. She was sitting at home for 4 years, wanting to do science also. And she was so tense they couldn't have children. She finally adopted 2 children. And then finally she got a little job at Caltech for 3 months or so, and that's when I met her for the first time. She came with her 2 children here in a station wagon, all alone. Her husband was at home in Texas. She had to get these kids to school. She had to shop for them. She had to wash for them. She had to do everything for the kids and do her science. That's the only chance she had for 3 months or so. She worked herself to death. And she told me, Juliana, you're married now. If you ever consider having a child, and I wanted them, hide it. Don't let anybody know ever that you have a child. You'll be kicked out at Caltech like this. And that's what I followed. I followed Beatrice's advice. I hid my pregnancies. I lived close by, so I could go back and forth. There was no health insurance when you went to the hospital and gave birth. It was a private luxury at Caltech. So I got out of the hospital in 1 day because I couldn't afford that private luxury. So we didn't have health insurance either. And later I would visit Beatrice when she was in Washington and so on, and her tough life continued. She finally decided to split up with her husband. They went through a very friendly divorce, and she kept the daughter and he kept the son. And it's only then when she split up and she was a single mother, she got a position at Yale. She became a full professor at Yale, and I was so pleased because my PhD advisor was there, Pierre DeMarc, and I'm sure he was helpful. He was always supportive of me too. And so she got this position, and then she dated a colleague of mine, Richard Larson, and it was discovered that she had cancer, and she died shortly afterwards. She was barely 40 years old. She worked herself to death. Now they have an asteroid named after her. They have awards, the American Astronomical Society named after her, but it's too late. She had a hell of a life, but she inspired me. Hide the fact if you want a child. Go ahead, but hide it. And I have a lot of bitter experiences here too. But because I wanted to support my husband, I swallowed it all. I swallowed a lot. And I could have gotten a job somewhere else, but I told my husband we would see each other once a month. You know, how do you carry out a marriage, seeing each other once a month? And he so very much wanted a wife who would accompany him to meetings, who would accompany him on vacations, who would accompany him and everything in his life, who would be home, who would cook for him. He didn't want to cook. And, you know, he had so many, he wanted a chic wife. He wanted so many things. And I figured I couldn't do that if I wouldn't be close by. So I swallowed LA, I swallowed the smog, I swallowed everything I didn't like about here. And, but the smog has gone away, it's much better, it has improved. And so I basically stayed here to help him with his dreams. It was a good marriage, but I had to pay a lot. I'm still paying in many ways. But I swallow it, that's life.
On balance, you were a winner.
Yes, it's tough. Stanford is different. And I came from Canada. I was educated in Canada. We had a very small faculty, but 2 full-time professors among the small faculty. And both of them inspired me a great deal. Without these women, I probably wouldn't have had the guts to do it. But they had a very fulfilled life, and they did many things that men don't do. You know, they inspired me. And we need that for our young students here, for our women students. What I did is, when I ended up here, is I had preferentially women students, Caltech women students. I had them come to my house and see what life of a working professional is like. And I picked the Chinese ones preferentially. I wanted my children to learn Chinese because I figured there's a lot on the other side of the ocean from LA. And I wanted to get to know things that are not translated. And so my children had to learn Chinese. So I used Chinese students to speak in Chinese, Mandarin, to my children and to play with them and to see what I was doing. I would have a student come, she was she was out of China and she was working here in a house, and she asked me if she could clean my house. And I was in the front, it was Easter, and I was hiding Easter eggs, and I looked at her and I said, "Oh, this is not a cleaning lady. This is a highly intellectual woman who is desperate." And I said, "I'll clean the house if you speak in Chinese to my children, if you go swimming to them to the Caltech pool and play with them in Chinese only. I want my children to learn Chinese. I don't know anything myself." And so that's how I got Chinese people involved in bringing up my children. And I lived next door. I understand some of these women are very important scientists now, but they saw what the life of a struggling wife who's a scientist is like, you know. So I tried to pass that on.
So would you encourage young women to go into science today?
I love science. I would do it again. I would do theoretical physics again. And yes, but you have to know what you're facing and somehow survive it. I did. I did survive. And I had a very good marriage. And I would marry him again. I told my husband when he died, "Don't flirt too much, and whatever comes, I'm coming." So, yes. One of my daughters is an engineer, Stanford-trained engineer, and she does unusual stuff, and the other one is in medicine, and she does unusual stuff. And I was very interested in medicine due to the cancer background and my husband's eye problems and, you know, personal reasons. And I said, "You do it, you make new inventions." And she's very good at it. And she's very kind also.